And now, we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 2, The Pharmacist. The following episode contains actual facts where Stella Knickell poisoned her husband, Bruce Nichols. Viewer discretion is advised. Auburn, Washington, famous for the runoff of the Cascade Mountain Range and the death of one Mr. Bruce Nichols. Mr. Nichols is unresponsive, dying in the bed he once shared with his wife because of lethal concoction. Dying now, Mr. Nichols is rushed to Harborview Medical Center, where a futile attempt at treating him fails to revive him.
On this episode of Killer Wives, we talk about how trusting the person you lay next to each night can get you killed. This is the story of Stella Knickell. It is a well-known fact that male killers go after people they don't know, while female killers take the lives of those closest to them. Then who took the life of Bruce Nichols on the afternoon of July the 5th, 1986? To find that out, we need some background on Mrs. Nichols. Stella Knickell was born Stella Maudine Stevenson in Colton, Oregon, to Alva and George Stevenson. She grew up poor. By her age 16th birthday, Stella gave birth to her daughter Cynthia Hamilton. She then moved to Southern California, married, and had another daughter. There she began to have various run-ins with the law, to include a conviction for fraud in 1968. Another charge the following year of beating her first daughter with a curtain rod, and a conviction for forgery in 1971. Nichols served 6 months in jail for the fraud charge and was ordered into counseling after the abuse charge. Nichols met Bruce Nichols in 1974. Bruce was a heavy equipment operator with a drinking habit, which suited her lifestyle just fine, and the two were married in 1976. In the course of their 10-year marriage, he entered rehab and gave up drinking, cold turkey, which she resented him for. When her bar visits were curtailed by Bruce's sobriety, Nichols began requesting evening shifts at her security screening job at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. And she took on a home aquarium as a new hobby. All that changed, though, on June the 5th, 1986, at the couple's new address in Auburn, Washington, when Miss Nichols had finalized her plans to murder her husband based upon two factors. The one being that she knew he trusted her and would not hurt him, and that the other being he was frequented by headaches from a job he didn't particularly enjoy. The winds were blowing at about 8 miles per hour on that 68-degree June day of 1986, when Bruce, her husband of 12 years, came home from work with a splitting headache. According to Miss Nichols, Bruce took 4 extra strength Excedrin capsules from a bottle in their home. He did this for the headache and suddenly collapsed to the bed minutes later. Miss Nichols called an ambulance which took him to the hospital. He died shortly thereafter at Harborview Medical Center, where treatment had failed to revive him. His death was initially ruled to be by natural causes, with attending physicians citing emphysema. But a second death, less than just a week later, several miles away from Knickell home, forced police to reconsider the cause of Bruce's death. On June 11th, in the town of Auburn, Sue Snow, a prompt, diligent 40-year-old Auburn bank manager, took 2 Excedrin capsules from an early morning headache that had been bothering her. Snow's husband, Paul Webking, also took 2 capsules from the same bottle for his arthritis and left the house for work. At 6:30 a.m., their 15-year-old daughter, Haley, found Snow collapsed on the floor of her bathroom. She was unresponsive with a faint pulse. Paramedics were called and transported Snow to Harborview Medical Center, the same place that Bruce went, but she died later that day without regaining consciousness. During a subsequent autopsy later that same week of Snow, Assistant Medical Examiner Janet Miller detected the scent of bitter almonds. Typically, an odor that emanates from the body, distinctive to cyanide poisoning, smells like bitter almonds. Subsequent tests of Mrs. Snow's blood and body fluids verified that Snow had died of acute poisoning. Investigators examined the contents of Snow and Webking's household and located the source of the cyanide in the family's medicine cabinet. The bottle of Excedrin capsules that both Snow and Webking had used the morning of Snow's death were still in the medicine cabinet. 3 capsules out of those that remained in the 60-capsule bottle were found to be laced with cyanide in toxic quantities. Now, the plot thickens. A murder by cyanide became sensational news in Auburn, in the state of Washington, when another tainted bottle from the same lot was found. The lot bottle was found in a grocery store in nearby Kent, Washington. Bristol Myers, the manufacturers of Excedrin, responded to the discovery of cyanide in their product with a heavily publicized recall of all Excedrin products in the Seattle area. They joined with a conglomerate of drug companies to offer a $300,000 reward for the capture of the person responsible for the poisons. It is at this point in the story that the plot thickens. In response to the publicity, Miss Knickell decided to come forward to cash in on her husband's murder. On June 19th, she told police that her husband had recently died suddenly after taking pills from a 40-capsule bottle of Excedrin, with the same lot number, mind you, as one of the ones that killed Snow. Tests by the Food and Drug Administration confirmed the presence of cyanide in her husband's remains, and the 2 Excedrin bottles Nichols had turned over to the police. Initial suspicions were directed towards the manufacturer, Bristol Myers. Both Webking and the murderous Mrs. Nichols filed wrongful death lawsuits against the company. The FDA inspected the Mooresville, North Carolina plant where the tainted lot had been packaged. With a fine-tooth comb, they went over that place, but they found no traces of cyanide to explain its presence in Washington bottles. On June the 18th, Bristol Myers recalled all Excedrin capsules in the entire United States, pulling them from store shelves and warning consumers to not consume the pills that they had already purchased. 2 days later, the company announced the recall of all of their non-prescription capsules products as well. On June the 24th, a cyanide-contained bottle of Anacin 3 was found at the same store where Snow had bought her contaminated Excedrin. What a coincidence. What a coincidence. On June the 27th, Washington State put out a mandatory 90-day ban on the sale of non-prescription medication in capsule form. Examinations of the contaminated bottles by the FBI crime lab found that in addition to containing cyanide powder, that the poison capsules also contained flecks of an unknown green substance. Further tests showed that the substance was algicide, used in home aquariums, sold under the brand name Algae Destroyer. With contamination of Excedrin at the factory source having been ruled out, investigators began to focus their investigation on the end user of the product. The FBI began an investigation into product tampering having been the source of the poisoning the whole time. At the time, Excedrin was packaged in plastic bottles with the mouth of the bottle sealed with foil and the lid secured to the bottle with plastic wrap. How could it have been poisoned at the factory? Both Mr. Webb King, now at the hospital, and Miss Nichols were asked to take a polygraph examination. Mr. Webb King did so, but Knickell, who had started drinking heavily again, declined. A lawyer representing Knickell told reporters that she was too shaken up to be subjected to examination. Investigators, now suspicious, began to turn Knickell when they discovered that she claimed that the 2 contaminated Excedrin bottles that she had turned over to the police had been purchased at different times and at different locations. That doesn't make too much of sense. A total of 5 bottles had been found to be contaminated in the entire country, and it was regarded as suspicious that Knickell would happen to have acquired 2 of them purely by chance. When investigator focus turned to Knickell, detectives uncovered more circumstantial evidence pointing to her as the culprit. Knickell had taken out a total amount of $76,000 in insurance coverage of her husband's life, with an additional payout of $100,000 if his death was accidental. She was also known to have, even before Snow's death, repeatedly disputed doctors' ruling that her husband had died of natural causes. She didn't need him to die of natural causes. She needed him to die of an accidental death. Further, FBI investigators showed that Bruce's purported signatures on at least 2 of the insurance policies in his name had been forged. Investigators were also able to verify that Nichols had purchased Algae Destroyer from a local fish store. It was speculated that the algicide had become mixed with cyanide when Nichols used the same container to crush both surfaces and substances without washing it between uses. Knickell finally consented to a polygraph examination on November 1986. She failed, and investigators narrowed their focus to her even further. Concrete evidence proving that Knickell had even purchased or used cyanide was lacking, and despite their relative certainty that Nichols had orchestrated the poisonings as either an elaborate cover-up for an insurance-motivated murder of her husband or as a desperate attempt to force her husband's death to be ruled as an accident to increase her insurance payout. They were unable to build a strong enough case, though, supporting that arrest. In January of 1987, Mrs. Nichols' daughter, Hamilton, now grown, approached police with information about her mother. Knickell had spoken to her repeatedly about wanting Bruce dead, having grown bored with him after he quit drinking. Her firstborn daughter claimed her mother had even told her that she had tried to poison Bruce previously with foxglove hidden in capsules. Now, for those of you who don't know what foxglove is a beautifully growing perennial plant. The vibrancy of foxglove belies their poisonous nature. Ingesting either a small amount of the plant can cause unpleasant effects in some cases and death in others. Larger amounts can result in death. Although causes of this are rare, they have been documented. Now, her daughter told police that when the foxglove poisonings failed, her mother had begun library research into other methods and hit upon cyanide. Hamilton also claimed that Knickell had spoken to her about what the 2 of them would do with the insurance money if Bruce had died. Records from the Auburn Public City Library, when subpoenaed, showed that Knickell had checked out numerous books about poisonings, including human poisonings from the native and cultivated plants and deadly harvest. The former was marked as overdue in the library, indicating that Knickell had borrowed but never returned it. The FBI identified Nichols' fingerprints on cyanide-related pages of a number of works she had checked out during that same time period. Obviously, she didn't cover her tracks. By the summer of 1987, even Nichols' own attorney acknowledged that she was a prime suspect in the case. On December 9th of 1987, Nichols was indicted by a federal grand jury on 5 counts of product tampering, including to which resulted in the deaths of Bruce and the bank manager Snow. She was thereby arrested the same day. She went on trial in April of 1988 and was found guilty of all charges on May 9th, after 5 days of jury deliberation. Nichols' legal team sought a mistrial on the grounds of jury tampering and judicial misconduct. One of those jurors had been plaintiff in a case involving peeled Bacon Pepperidge Farm goldfish crackers. While it was deemed to be a manufacturer's error, the defense thought that it involved product tampering and therefore should have been disclosed during jury selection. However, the motion was denied. Nichols was sentenced to 2 terms of 90 years in prison. She was sentenced for the death of Bruce and Snow, and 3 10-year terms for the other product tampering that she had done. All sentences were to run concurrently, and the judge ordered Knickell to pay a small fine and forfeit her remaining assets to the families of the other victims. Knickell became eligible for parole in 2018 when she was 75 years old. Story update. As of April 2019, Knickell is housed in a female low-security, minimum security federal correctional institute in Dublin, California, just east of San Francisco. Her release date is given as July 10th of the year 2040. I wonder, could she make it that long? I wonder, could she be trusted in society again? For MNN, this is Charles Rivers. Join us again next week when we bring you another Killer Wives.